With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Fred Bilo to get us started.
I think Dr. Sybil's trying to get rid of me, actually. I'm not sure about that, but so I'm gonna start this off, sort of set the stage for a lot of what you're going to hear from the rest of my students. And the question I'm going to have is, what exactly is yield? I know you guys know what yield is, right? That's why you're here. But what is yield? If you had to describe it to somebody. And basically yield is how much you get. But yield means different things to different people. All right, I got to tell you, lately, as you get older, you actually have to eat healthier if you want to stay alive. I've learned, something to do with blood sugar, blood pressure, something like that. So I've been trying to eat healthier, which means my wife is trying to feed me healthy meals. My wife is right here. There she is. My wife Brenda. I think she's put up. I better not get this number wrong. Geez, let me do the math. 37 years she's put up with me, married to me. So. And she's been feeding me healthy meals, which But the other day, what she does is she puts the recipe out on the desk beforehand, right? And I decide I want to see, what punishment is in store for me. So she had a recipe out there, and I took a picture of some of it to share with you how I'm eating healthy. And what I was going to eat is quinoa, kale, couscous. I mean, think about it, quinoa, kale, couscous. I mean, it's pretty hard to make. It uses every single appliance and cutlery item in the whole kitchen to make it. And I got to do the dishes. I mean, there's ingredients that, geez, you've never heard of, right? I mean, I think some of these are food, and it's really fiddly when, to make. I mean, it takes forever. There's a whole list of stuff. You don't want to see the picture of quinoa, kale, couscous, I'll tell you. But as I walked by looking at the recipe, I saw yield. Maybe this isn't so bad, right? I like yield. And then I discovered it's 6 servings. So I did the math. I'm going to have to eat this stuff 3 times. And eating an extra serving of couscous, kale, quinoas, out of the question. I mean, here's a case where I might actually like to have a little less yield, if you really want to know. So yield means different things to different people. I mean, from a corn standpoint, a crop standpoint, there's 2 ways you can look at yield. It can be the total amount of dry matter produced. I mean, that's all of the quinoa, kale, couscous. Or yield can be only a portion of the total. In your case, the weight of the grain. That's me picking the couscous out, if I can. So it depends what you're growing a crop for. Now, if it was silage or forage or biofuel crop, you want the whole thing. But you're interested in the grain, is my guess. So when the yield is part of the crop, then an important parameter called the harvest index comes into play. By the way, this is the physiology part right now that you're getting. So if you look at harvest index is how much of the crop is in the form I desire. So if you like math, harvest index is the weight of the grain divided by the weight of the total plant. And now think about this, right? Let's do some math, some algebra. There are 2 ways that you can increase crop yield based on this equation. You can either increase the total amount of the plant, bigger plant, more biomass, or you can increase the harvest index. Now, how's it normally work? Normally, I'll tell you, big plant, big yield. I know that's what you see. So big biomass gives a big yield. But you can also increase the harvest index. I'm not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it today, but we are going to demo it. Short corn, I know you've heard about this. Short corn increases yield by increasing the harvest index. So what is a typical harvest index for corn? Typical harvest index for corn is 52%. So that means 52% of what you produce above ground is in the form you desire. What's the other 48%? Well, I know, I mean, you could pick your name. Is it trash? Is it litter? I mean, what do you call it? So for every bushel of corn you produce, you have 43.7 pounds, this is on a dry matter basis, of what's left. Now I've heard farmers call it litter or trash. And those don't sound, like they make it very good, do they? I mean, the scientific name for what's left is the stover. I don't know why they call it stover. I think I had a cheese in Wisconsin called stover once. I'm not sure, but it's not a very good term. Or the term I'm going to use is residue. Now, by the way, if you can come up with a better term for what's left after you harvest, I'd really like to know it, because this stuff is valuable. Never underestimate the value of the residue which is left over from your harvest. I'll tell you a couple things of benefits of residue. Residue is the way you build soil organic matter. The only way. Residue also, if you got residue on the surface and you're going to have erosion, whether that's water or wind, that residue protects it. Residue is like a food source for microorganisms. We're going to hear a lot about that today in some of the subsequent presentations. And then residue is actually a huge source of mineral nutrition. I mean, of course, if you break it down, in some of the biological products, I think some of them that our sponsors are talking about, help break down that residue to get the nutritional value out of it. So, residue is not litter or trash. It's valuable. All right, so how are you going to increase the amount of residue you have? Grow a higher yield, because the amount of residue left is directly related to the yield. Remember, I said you got a harvest index of 52%, so, do the wonders of math. And actually, Dr. Sybil can do this on his cell phone. He can calculate how much residue you get for different levels of yield. So they look at 200 bushels, that's 4.5 tons of residue above ground. I mean, if I go to 250, I get more, 300 more. Residue is like nature's biological, right? And so I'm here to tell you that if you increase your yield, you also increase the residue. Now, you might have to manage the residue a little bit. That can be done. I'm lobbying. I would like to see more residue be a credit for carbon sequestration. Right now it's not. You got to do something. We'll hear later, like cover crop or change your tillage. But honest to God, if you increase your yield, you're making more residue. And so this, in my opinion, practices, if you change practices to increase yield, they should also be a carbon credit. Now, if you're growing the crop for yield, so not for the whole crop, but if you're growing it for yield, you can make yield into a math equation. It's a product function of what's known as yield components. So corn yield's product function of how many plants you have per acre, how many kernels you have on each plant, and the weight of each individual kernel. And an increase or decrease in any one of these can be responsible for an increase or decrease in yield. And these act at different times in the growth and life of the plant. I mean, plants per acre, planting and emergence. Kernels per plant, that's that early vegetative, the flowering and brown silk. And then weight per kernel is during seed fill. This is where we're at right now. Now, you have to increase at least one of these to have a higher yield. If you could figure out a math way to increase it without one of these, boy, I want to know it, So you got to increase one of these. Which one is under your control? Which one do you have the most control over? It is plant population. Hate to tell you, I know you think it's the evil seed guy trying to sell you more seed, but this is the yield component under your control that has the biggest impact on crop crop yield, and because of that, this is the factor that's changed the most in your farming career. I'm going to show you the average yield of corn in the U.S. over the last 55 years, and then I'll superimpose over that the average planting density grown in the U.S. over that same time period. So what we're showing here is average yield of corn in the U.S. That's the orange triangle. Oh, the line of orange, by the way. And so you'll notice that the average yield goes up and down depending on that year's weather. You know, I tell you, I was worried about the weather until we got this rain. I mean, geez, the rain. That was like money falling from the sky. I don't know what I did to get the weather gods to give me that and this beautiful day. So pretty sure I have a jet later that's going to be pretty bad. But, well, on average, grain yield in the U.S. goes up about 2 bushels per acre per year. And associated with that has been a linear increase in the number of plants planted. That's the blue line. See how the blue line's not jagged like yield? Because you actually have to plant the plants before you know what the weather's going to be to impact the yield. I want you to harken back to 1965. In 1965, the average yield of corn in the U.S. was about 70 bushels. Planted a little under 20,000 plants per acre. Probably a 36-inch row, maybe a 40-inch row, maybe even a few hills. And now, 55 years later, the average yield has more than doubled. And the average planting density in the U.S. is just under 32,000 plants per acre, mostly a 30-inch row. Some of you are higher. And guess what? It's going to have to go even higher. I mean, if I look at how plant population changes, it goes up a little under 400 plants per acre per year. So today's hybrids absolutely tolerate a higher population. I mean, when you select for yield, one of the things you select for is how to tolerate a higher population. So population of plants is going up. You're doing that for yield, not the seed guy's fault. Now I have another question for you. As the population of plants goes up, what happens to the size of each plant's root system? So I got more plants. What happens to the size of each plant's root system? I hope this is an easy one. It gets smaller. I have photographic evidence of this because this is my graduate students' favorite task, digging up and washing roots. Honest to God, they love it. Talk about a good time. Look at this. Look at this sweet root washing setup, right? We're washing the roots. We're digging the roots up. We're soaking them. Got me all this water in a big tank. Who doesn't love that? And then we're pressure washing them. And then we're going to store these roots. See them there? We're gonna scan them and weigh them. And there's nothing my students would rather do than dig up roots. The hotter it is and the drier the soil is when they're digging them up, the happier they are. I mean, look at the sheer happiness on these students' faces as they're digging up those roots. And so the photographic evidence shows that they get distinctly smaller as I increase the density. So I'm showing you here this is 3 densities, 30,000, you know, that's the past. 36, sort of the current, and 44 the future. They get distinctly smaller. Now you can see it in the picture, I hope, right? But we did something as stupid as weighing the roots so we could quantify this, and so I put the weight of the roots here, and oh, by the way, I used grams to make this appear more scientific. So the weight of the root system goes down. And by the way, I can quantify the rate of that decline. It declines 2.5% for every 1,000 plant per acre increase in density. 1,000 more plants means you had 2.5% roots per plant. I told you the density went up 400 plants per acre per year. Every year you got 1% less roots. Now, and this train can't be stopped. I mean, you could select plants that had bigger root systems at the expense of yield. So I will guarantee you, as you plant more plants, you are going to have smaller root systems. This is in your future, and something we have to reckon with. Now, I have a theory this is what us professor types do. You know, we come up with these learned theories. And my theory is that mineral nutrients and water enter the plant through the root. Pretty sure I can prove that one. Now you think this is going to be an issue, you know, as we're growing more plants? Makes me wonder. Now, I got another question for you. This is related to mineral nutrition. And my question is, well, when were soil test values calibrated to corn yield? What year? Remember? So soil test value was calibrated to corn yield in the 60s and 70s. And by the way, we still use the same values today, 60s and 70s. In some cases, once you cross the state boundary, they have different thresholds. So that I wonder how that works. And in some areas, they actually have a different extraction test, you know, based on the parent material. But soil test values were calibrated in the 60s and 70s. Some of you weren't farming then. Some of you look pretty old. I think you were farming then. But anything different about how we're farming today? Well, we're growing a lot more plants. I mean, that's when soil test value was calibrated to corn yield. I mean, think of the size of the root system then, right? This makes me wonder. I mean, I didn't say you shouldn't take a soil test. The soil test is the starting point. It is not necessarily the finishing point. I do not believe that you can economically and sustainably rise your soil test to a high enough level to grow 300 bushel corn. I mean, I don't think you're going to be able to afford it. Either you or the rest of the world. So how are we going to ensure that we got adequate plant nutrition in the future when we're growing more plants and they have smaller root systems? Any idea? I had a thought, and I thought, well, why don't we put the fertilizer where the root is? I mean, this makes sense, right? Better placement and better sources of fertilizer. These are two of the 4 R's. Some fertilizers, by the way, are co-granulated, multiple nutrients in the same granule. We'll hear later that you can actually encapsulate, do stuff to some fertilizers to keep them more available, or there's other practices you can do, like changing the pH to have nutrients be more available. But better fertilizers, better placement. You'll hear a little bit about this, and we'll show you some of the equipment we use to do that. This is a no-brainer. Now another one, and this one is a little more speculative, but it sure sounds cool, is why don't I use a biological? See, I put a question mark about that because the jury's still out. Some of these no doubt work. You're going to hear this is the Wild West of ag now, biologicals, and we have some of our sponsors are displaying those. And we are very heavily studying them, which ones work, where they work, you know, why they work. That's the physiology part. So biologicals. Well, what if I had a biological that helped mine nutrients out of the soil or extended the surface area of the root? That's going to help as well. That's going to be in your future, and that's why you hear so much about it. All right, well, back to the yield components. I said you have to increase at least one of these in order to increase yield. Why don't I increase 2? You know, I go, well, I'll just increase 2 of them. That'll be even better. Why don't I increase all 3? Very difficult. These yield components are like children that don't get along, right? You know, they're always at it, their bad behavior. So it is almost impossible to increase all of them because they are negatively related. One of them typically compensates for another one. I will tell you that if you have more plants per acre, each plant's going to have fewer kernels. I'll show you one example of this. This is 10 hybrids. Each one of these is 10 hybrids. These are hybrids out of the picture I showed you. Each one is a 10 hybrids. As you increase the population of plants, each plant has fewer kernels. Negative related. Now sometimes the more plants make up for that. Now the other problem you have is that as you have more kernels on every plant, each kernel has a smaller weight. I mean, I'm telling you, this is absolutely negatively related. Again, here's these same 10 hybrids. You know, some plants got a lot of kernels because they're small. Other plants have few kernels, they're bigger. This is called yield component compensation, and so it is almost impossible to simultaneously increase them all. So I looked. You guys know what the world record yield is, right? Dave Hula out of Virginia, 616. He knows a whole new kind of math that I don't understand to be able to get that kind of yield. I don't know where he learned algebra, but I can't do that math. I really can't. It all comes down to this: managing that negative relationship. So how are you going to break this? This is the key, by the way. The key is that you're going to have to do something as you manage more plants to break the negative relationship among yield components. How? How are you going to reverse that? Now, even making it less negative would be good, a step in the right direction. So the way I think you're going to do it, again, it's coming back to a lot of the theme of what you're going to hear today. Better fertilizer sources, placement, and biologicals. That's what we're going to talk to you about. You're trying, and that's the why of what you're after here today. How can I simultaneously increase the yield component? All right, well, I got 4 key takeaways before I turn it over. More yield means more crop residue. More yield is a good thing when it comes to improving the health and quality of your soil, because you got the residue. Never forget that. The problem you're all going to face is that as you increase the population of plants, each plant has a smaller root system. What we're after is this breaking this negative relationship among yield components. That's the key to high yield. And sadly, if you want dessert, you have to eat all of your quinoa, kale, couscous 3 times to stay healthy. So